Breaking right now, another twist in the ongoing mystery with Lady Victoria Starmer. Now, you know, this is a story that the mainstream media is not wanting to touch. But earlier this week, when I reported on these growing concerns about the Starmer's marriage in regards to the secret shape of Starmer's family and the fact that there had been a clear deterioration in the, how do I put it, the emotional state of Lady Victoria, which can be summed up by these pictures. At that point, Downing Street quite clearly briefed that Lady Victoria Starmer would not be attending Pope Francis's funeral tomorrow. Now, that was a surprising announcement, a surprising piece of briefing, especially given that the expectation from the US was that Melania Trump would be attending alongside Donald Trump. Now, just yesterday, senior political figures told me that they were now describing what Lady Victoria Starmer was doing was a Michelle Obama, when Michelle, you might remember, chose to skip the funeral of the Democratic former president Jimmy Carter and then the inauguration of Trump. However, this afternoon, in briefing to GB News, a significant U-turn from Downing Street, Lady Victoria Starmer will now be at Vatican City tomorrow morning with her husband. Watch.
Family and Keir Starmer and his wife, Lady Starmer, are also going to be going. There were rumours that Lady Starmer was not going to be coming, but that's been confirmed that she will. So there you go.
Now that's significant because the briefing earlier in the week was very much that she would not be there. And as I have been taking you through this week, what you've seen is that every time there is social media pressure in regards to Starmer's family, in regards to what's really going on, in regards to the marriage, Lady Victoria Starmer is forced to appear in public. And of course, there is a significant debate around this story. Lots of people don't even think I should be talking about it. I mean, there's Starmer, by the way, with all of his journalist mates laughing and guffawing on the plane. And when that picture went viral, the decision was not, oh, maybe we should look into exactly why Starmer maintains these very close relationships with the journalists who cover him. Instead, the decision was just made, oh, we're going to ban photographers from taking pictures of Starmer speaking to journalists on the plane. So this is about information control. And I will have the honest discussions with you that the mainstream media will not. Why did Downing Street brief earlier this week that Lady Victoria Starmer would not be attending Pope Francis's funeral, only to U-turn the day before? Something is going on here. We know something is going on. You know, I know something has been going on for months, and I've been trying to get to the truth as much as possible. You'll remember, for example, my interview with Paul Staines, the former boss of Guido Fawkes, also ignored by the mainstream media. Watch.
We've both been in the game a long time. You know the rules. If you can't stand it up completely, you can't run the story. So we have a name, as do the Mail and the Telegraph. We have a birth certificate, and people have been looking into it. People have been journalists have contacted the family. So it's in play, and a lot of people do know it, but we have not been able to substantiate it to the degree that you need to publish.
Okay, so to clarify, would you say that this story is about the shape of Keir Starmer's family?
Yes. Yeah, that's a very good way of phrasing it.
So, Peter Whittle, founder and director of the New Culture Forum. Look, I don't expect you to know, and I don't want you to talk about the intimate details of what's going on in the Starmer's marriage. But for me, this is a story about transparency from the mainstream media, a mainstream media that, by the way, were prepared, and you will remember this, to report on every twist and turn in Boris and Carrie Johnson's marriage. Every time that they had fights, there were front page splashes in even the right-wing newspapers. Yet when it comes to Starmer, there is total radio silence. Now, Let's start with the Pope Francis funeral, right? That is quite significant that earlier in the week, there was very, very clear briefing to all of the journalists that Lady Victoria Starmer would not be attending. There's been this pressure over the course of the week over the fact that she was missing. And now all of a sudden, we hear from GB News that she will be going, but there's no information given to us about, okay, well, what changed? Because our briefings, unlike in the US, where this would all take place, you know, in the White House briefing room, our briefings are all done in a clandestine manner, where it's like the Westminster journalists speak secretly to the Downing Street staff. And so there's no transparency around this story. Like, why is Victoria Starmer going now? Surely at least we should be able to ask that question.
Yes. I think there's a complete difference in the way that the media treats the two parties. But, you know, look no further than America, Dan. I mean, you know, the press there, which is the mainstream media in New York, broadcast and print, is pretty solidly pro-Democrat. And they kept from the public, I mean, although frankly, anyone with any sense could see it anyway, the sheer state of mental decline of the president. So that when it became very obvious during that debate that he had, that, you know, something was very, very wrong, it suddenly became very clear that they had actually kind of covered for him for a long time. Now, in this country, of course, because we don't have a sort of, our royal family, as you know, kind of takes that role, you know, but in this country, when it comes to the wives or husbands or whatever of prime ministers, I seem to remember that even with David Cameron, Samantha Cameron, you know, there was a lot of kind of, I would say gossip, but a lot of coverage about them. But I would say that there's no getting away from it that Starmer is one of their guys. You know, he's one of the media's guys. It's as simple as that. He's kind of, you know, they all swim in the same water. And so they are going to be a lot more kind of careful about reporting on anything. I actually don't know anything about what he has or hasn't, you know, been doing or whatever, you know. But I do tell one thing. It kind of makes me slightly nostalgic for the days of the 1970s and Harold Wilson and James Cameron. They had kind of wives. I don't think anyone can remember their names. I don't think everyone knew their names at the time. You know, it was a much more kind of, it wasn't even a role, but our prime minister's role has become more and more presidential. And as a result, you know, I suppose, you know, there's certainly more, you know, exposure for the, you know, for the spouse.
But first, the reason you're watching this show is that it's becoming increasingly difficult to trust mainstream media or the so-called fact checkers who claim to determine which facts are true. And for good reason, given the ongoing debates over free speech, the controversy surrounding Brexit, and how Trump and other anti-establishment politicians are portrayed. But I have the solution. It's called Ground News, and it's the best way to stay informed and cut through media bias and manipulative narratives so you can get the facts for yourself. It has been a game changer for a news junkie like me, and you can see it all for yourself right now. ground.news/outspoken. But I want to show you this incredible website and app in action. So let's take a story that I've been very passionate about, the Supreme Court ruling in the United Kingdom that made the point that women can only be biological adult human females. You can see clearly in one place that over 350 sources around the world covered the story. Ground News instantly shows how it's being covered by the media, broken down by whether they lean to the left or the right. Now, this is called the illustration bias distribution chart. If you scroll down, you can see every headline about the story along with the political bias and ownership of the publication. So you can see quite clearly for yourselves that on the right, the Daily Wire cover the case totally soundly with the headline, UK Supreme Court rules trans-identifying men are not women. Spiked Online, very forthright, declaring women exist, get over it. While the Daily Telegraph looked in depth at the disgraced famous faces who declared trans women are women. By stark contrast, the left-wing National said the result was only a victory for gender-critical feminists, and the Canary ran with a clearly ridiculous headline, victory for the far right, as Supreme Court rolls back trans women's rights by 2 decades. Now, I would absolutely love the Canary to tell J.K. Rowling to her face that she is far right. Anyway, my favourite feature is the Blind Spot feed. That services upwards of 20 stories daily that receive the majority of coverage from one side of the political spectrum. So if you like the news like I do, the Blind Spot feed is the best way to get a balanced perspective on what's happening. So go to ground.news/outspoken, or if you're watching on YouTube or Rumble, just scan the QR code on screen to subscribe today. Use that address and you will get 40% off the same Vantage plan that I use for unlimited access. So let me repeat the address: ground.news/outspoken. But now back to the show. Yes, but it's interesting though, because actually what Starmer's trying to do, Peter, is take it back to that era that you refer to. But I think he's a hypocrite when it comes to this, because let me give you the example of the children. So he believes that we don't have a right to know the names of his children. Now, I'm someone that verges virtually always on the side of free speech. So I think it's ludicrous that we don't know the names of the children of the Prime Minister of this country, given that, by the way, they will be receiving security protection paid for by taxpayers. But Starmer picks and chooses when he decides to deploy his children. So let me give you two examples where he has deployed them for political reasons. Very recently, over the Netflix series Adolescence, which I just believe, by the way, I liked the show. I thought it was very good drama, but it then became a psyop, which was all designed to convince us that there was that the big problem in society are young boys. I mean, it was basically an anti-white racism psyop, essentially. But in this case, Peter, Starmer kept on talking about his kids, raised them in PMQs, spoke about watching the show with the family, the fact that they're teenagers. So he was talking about them all the time. Then the other example was, when the big Lord Alli scandal broke, and it's like, why is Lord Alli buying his wife these designer clothes? Why is Lord Alli buying your designer glasses? I mean, weird. But do you remember when the second part of the scandal was the fact that Starmer had access to Lord Ali's penthouse apartment, and the rumour was that it was because of the fact that there was trouble in the marriage. And instead, Starmer decided to throw his teenage son under the bus then and say, oh, no, it was because my son needed this penthouse apartment in Mayfair to study for his GCSEs. So I don't think you can pick and choose. Like, if you want to deploy your children into the political debate over Adolescence or over Lord Ali, then surely we have a right to know their names.
Absolutely. And also, why shouldn't we, as you say, know their names, for goodness sake? I mean, these are not or shouldn't be state secrets. I'm slightly minded of Harry and Meghan, actually, in this way. Still, no one would ever recognize these kids, if they came up on the street. We still don't know what they even
exactly.
look
Do
like.
they even exist?
Exactly. Do they even actually exist? Yes. I mean, but I suppose the one thing you could say for them, actually, is they have been quite consistent in this way, in the way that Starmer hasn't. I seem to remember as well that with Blair's family, there were certain problems at one point with the daughter. And in fact, the press actually showed great restraint there. I mean, I don't know if you remember that, Dan, but it was going back a good 10 years or whatever. But I think really, of course, politicians use their families when they want to. I think he spoke, did he not, about watching Adolescence with his whole family?
Yes.
And all of this. I think it's a bit cringe-making, sick-making, actually. I mean, I watched the show too, for what it's worth. And as you say, I think it's like the dead cat thing.
Yeah.
You've got all the problems in society and they say, yeah, that's true. No, but look over here, there's a dead cat.
This is so much easier to blame all of our issues on young, white, working class teenage kids who come from nuclear families, because that's not going to offend anyone. And look, so often, and you know what happens in these cases, Peter, so often they just try and convince us that what we're saying is racist, when in fact, the only reason that I realised that actually based this series on that shocking case in London of a black teenager who stabbed a 15-year-old young girl to death over a teddy bear. It was in South London, in Croydon. The only reason I knew that the show had, at least in part, been based on that case was because I read an interview from Stephen Graham, who is, the writer and main star, in the Radio Times, in a mainstream media publication. And then, they're trying to convince us that we're racist for suggesting. It's like, hang on a moment, you're the one that put it out there. But by the way, Peter, let me just play you just a little bit more from Paul Staines when he was talking about the whole Lord Alli apartment situation, because I think it is worth just reminding people.
Marked change. You referred to it in the podcast with the bombshells, that all of a sudden, as soon as the Daily Mail and the Daily Telegraph started to suggest, where's Vicky, the disappearing wife, I remembered I made a video about that, all of a sudden she was out with a huge amount of force, and it was very public. I mean, it all started, do you remember, with that picture on Instagram, loved up picture on Instagram during the Taylor Swift concert, and from there was a marked change. So it was very clear they wanted to shut down the rumours, but I guess it hasn't worked.
Well, what the lobby suspects about Lord Alli's property, they don't really buy into. I don't think any of us really buy into it was for the son to do his revision for his GCSEs. That was he in the doghouse, and was he kicked out? Was he, using the bedrooms at the penthouse? That's what they're suspicious of. Was he not under the same roof as Victoria?
Well, yes, indeed. And I had learned that there were...
So look, I'm going to keep on this story. Don't worry, I'll keep telling you the truth, because I just don't believe, and I fundamentally mean this, I do not believe that we should live in a society where all of the chattering classes, all of the Westminster journalists, all of the politicians are talking about a story. And trust me, they're all talking about Lady Victoria Starmer at the moment. They are all talking about her. I don't believe that's right if they don't think that we should be able to speak to you about it. That's all I'm saying. And I have huge sympathy for this woman. It's not about that. It's just about the fact that I don't believe in covering stories up.
Thank you so much for watching Dan Wootton Outspoken. Please click on my face just to the bottom left to subscribe to this brand new independent news source, and turn on the notification bell so you'll be alerted to our brand new live shows, uncancelled interviews, and special royal episodes. Outspoken is also now available as a podcast, so you can listen to the show every weekday on the go, wherever you are.